My name is Justin KILCULLEN. I'm the European representative on the Global Council, and I've been asked to moderate this session for you, the title of which is Walking the Talk, Civil Society as Accountable Development Actors. So, one of the things that I really like about the Istanbul Principles is that each principle begins with the phrase, civil society organizations are effective as development actors when we, and then we make a commitment. And it's a very high-level commitment. A principle, by definition, is a high-level thing and not easy to implement. It would be no good if these things were easy. They are challenging. And we cannot just make a declaration. We have to work hard at delivering on these commitments. And the question we're going to ask ourselves today is, well, how are we doing? And how do we know how we're doing? And how will we measure what we're doing? So this session is going to have the benefit of looking at some of the accountability mechanisms that civil society NGOs have put in place since the Istanbul Principles were proclaimed 7 years ago, and to check out whether these are working, what are the experiences we have from them, what can we learn one from the other, and how we might be able to make them better as we go on. So on the stage here we have 5 speakers, and then, but before we begin we will have a video which I'll talk about shortly. So we have ANALIA BETTONI from Uruguay, who has very graciously accepted to do her presentation in English, although she did want to speak in Spanish, but because of the difficulty, she will speak to us in English. And she is from Rendir Cuentas, which is a regional initiative on accountability in Latin America. We have Amy Taylor, who is head of partnership in CIVICUS, who is resident in South Africa, although herself she's a US citizen. We have Ellie GASAGARA from Kenya, who is vice president of World Vision International and with a responsibility for accountability, and a member of the board of Accountability Now, which is another mechanism which we were delighted to hear about. We have Suzanne Aristide from Unitas Bolivia, who will talk about the Rendir Cuentas model from a national perspective. And we have Suzanne Keating, who is CEO of DOCHAS, the Irish National NGO Platform, who will give a kind of reaction from the point of view of NGOs to all of these mechanisms and where she feels they might be relevant or not so relevant, or what the challenges are for implementing agencies. To begin, though, we have EMELE DIUTUTURAGA, who was to be on this panel but was unable to come here. She is the president of PIANGO, the Pacific Island NGO Alliance, and she is going to address us now by video if the technology works. And we welcome our live stream audience in the Pacific Islands to this conference. EMELE, are you there?
Warm Pacific greetings from our blue continent, the Pacific Ocean region. I'm unable to join you for the Istanbul +7 gathering in Bangkok, but I'm pleased to be able to share with you how we here at PIANGO, the Pacific Islands Association of Non-governmental Organizations, have been walking the talk since Istanbul 2010, where we gathered on the road to Busan. We at the PIANGO network have been upholding the promise of Busan, specifically the legacy of paragraph 22, the Istanbul Principles, because we also contributed to it as one of the 80 countries in the consultations leading up to the Istanbul adoption. Drawing on our sister organizations, the Australian Council for International Development and the New Zealand Council for International Development, and looking at other examples such as the Vietnam Code, we here at PIANGO have developed what we have called the PIANGO Code of Minimum Standards. And also we have taken a bottom-up approach of piloting in 5 countries, Fiji, Vanuatu, Solomon Islands, Kiribati, and Tonga, for our members, the national platforms, to develop their own country codes And we've used, of course, the New Zealand code and also the Australian code. As we speak, we have draft codes for Fiji and for Vanuatu. Interestingly, in Vanuatu, they have considered having that translated into French, but we have supported the translation into Bislama, the local dialect. And those codes in the two countries is out for consultation with the CSO sector. In Kiribati, we have the code committee that is now drafting the code, and we're expecting the same from the Solomons and Tonga, and they will be convening a regional meeting, because in addition, we have been drawing on the global standards for CSO accountability as a consultation tool for our partners at the country level to gauge feedback about the code. And the idea is that we will have a regional code that PIANGO would be championing and as part of our CSO accountability charter. So colleagues, this is about us as civil society. This is about our accountability. This is about our legitimacy. This is about accountability to the people we serve, to ourselves, to each other. It's part of the self-regulatory mechanism that we're putting in place. We often hold governments to account, and governments often point to us about our own accountability. So in doing this, we're able to walk the talk. We are accountable, and so we can hold our governments accountable. All the very best, and we'll see you soon.
So thank you to Emily, and if she's listening there, thank you for that. So now we will listen to ANALIA, who's going to talk to us about Rendir Cuentas, the Latin American initiative. Thank you.
Hello, good morning to everybody. I'm very happy to be here because I was able to be in Istanbul when the principles were cooked, and I also was able to participate in the national consultations in my country and in the regional workshops. So I feel a part of all this. And I'm going to talk about our experience in the region. Rendir Cuentas, it's a regional initiative in Latin America and the Caribbean, and was started like 10 years ago. In the different countries, we started to think about which were the mechanisms to being more accountable, and we started also making some studies and research to know what civil society organization and other stakeholders thought about accountability. And there we found that it was very necessary to start working on this because there were growing demands to civil society and kind of distrust about their works in some countries, and so we needed to have some mechanisms to make them more, to broaden, as she said in the video, legitimacy, trust, and transparency, effectiveness, and showing the impact. And so in 2010, at the same time the Istanbul Principles were born, we started to work for 4 countries, Colombia, Ecuador, Uruguay, and Argentina. We started to work with Rendir Cuentas, and we prepared like common information gathering form for the organizations. Like the individual organizations in each country were going to give their information, not only the financial information, but the information regarding what they did, how they worked, about governance, about their funders, about all the information that could give them more legitimacy and more influence capacity also, and transparency of their work. And then in each country we also made what we call collective accountability exercises, that we put all that information together in order to make a more political statement about what the organizations worked and how they were managing to attend their publics, what were the sources, the resources, where they come from, what was the amount of the resources, and was what their impact. This was a very important part of Rendir Cuentas. It's not only showing, but trying to influence policies, national and regional policies. That's very important to be taken into account. Then Rendir Cuentas went on growing, and other countries began wanted to enter our initiative, like Bolivia, and other countries that have also manifested their interest, like Chile, Paraguay, and Peru, Nicaragua, that they are they want to start working on this. So Rendir Cuentas has been growing, not only because of the in their membership and country participation, but also in the kind of actions we do. We made a self-assessment manual, because our philosophy of work is that this is a self-assessment mechanism. It's not imposed by other actors, that is not imposed by donors or governments. It's an initiative that was born from the civil society, and that it's also an important point. And we were invited to many workshops. The Academy also was very interested in what we were doing, and we made some online courses for the organizations to bring this to broaden the interest in what we are doing. Then, if I had time, I can tell you about more about it. Then I handle my microphone.
I'm rushing people along here because we've lost a lot of time, but we can come back on a second round and take up some of those points. Amy, you're similar kind of involvement with this, but you have a Civicus iteration of it, or tell us what exactly you're doing.
Maybe if you'll allow me 30 seconds of Civicus membership, so then we have an understanding of our accountability mechanism. So hello and thank you, and I'm rushing. Civicus is a global membership network of civil society organizations and individual actors. We have members in more than 175 countries and totaling around 4,000. So this membership includes your local grassroots organization in Malawi with absolutely no registration status, to your big INGOs like Amnesty International. So Civicus as an entity, we are a signatory to the INGO Accountability Charter, like other actors, international actors in this room. And what we found through the INGO Accountability Charter is that it really helps us be explicit about how we're being accountable. So I think a lot of times as CSOs we say, well, actually it's in our organizational culture. It's our way of working. Of course young people are important to us. We don't necessarily need to have objectives and indicators around that, but it turns out those are actually really critically important for self-assessment. And so for me, through helping to assist on our reporting to the INGO Accountability Charter, it's really helped me realize where we can be more explicit. So instead of saying, well, of course, when we host our big International Civil Society Week, everyone's invited and everyone will participate. Now we have actually very explicit event principles and that we convene around. And they include things like diversity and participation and inclusion and sustainability. And they also include transparency. And so that's speaking not only about what we're doing that's great, but where we're falling short. So those kinds of mechanisms I find very useful. For Civicus and our own membership, we have a membership validation verification system. In a lot of ways, I think it's fantastic because it recognizes your social movement without registration status, an individual online campaigner, as well as the INGOs. But we also fall short in a lot of ways, and maybe that's where I'll focus in the spirit of transparency and accountability. We're currently relooking at our membership verification systems. And that's because it fails to recognize existing mechanisms at this point. So that means when we have members like Render Cuentas or Unitas who have existing self-regulation mechanisms, they're going through double processes, verification processes. This is, of course, something we criticize international actors and donors for doing, and yet we're kind of replicating that behavior within our own sector. So that's something we're looking at changing. We also want to do better about showing our accountability to the people we serve and utilizing next generation verification, validation tools that will allow us to do that better. We also want to use a mechanism that identifies weaknesses, not to exclude people from becoming members, but instead of trying to strengthen. So, for example, Civicus recently completed a gender and diversity audit. And based on that, we have lots of recommendations that we need to implement to be better. And so we want to see more self-regulation initiatives that are aimed at identifying weaknesses, but then focusing on building capacity so that we're more accountable as a sector versus using it as an exclusionary tool. And then finally, I think we want to implement a system that's really underpinned by the values reflected in the Istanbul Principles, and to have a values-based system that speaks to everybody, whether you're a local grassroots organization or a large NGO, so that we're all working towards the same cause.
Thanks very much, Amy. Ellie, you're on the board of accountability now. Can you tell us about that and how it maybe ties in with what we've heard so far and how it might be different? Is it also a self-assessment mechanism?
Thank you, Justin. Let me first clarify who I am. I'm Ellie, but I'm not from Kenya. I'm from Rwanda. I would say I'm a global citizen. I'm a Belgian, Rwandan, and working for World Vision based in Kenya. So I'm really a global citizen. So having said this, World Vision International is part of the Accountable Now. Accountable Now, you heard my colleague talking of International NGO Accountability Charter. So that was the name of the accountable we used to have, and now we are using Accountable Now as a name. So when you hear Accountable Now or International Accountability Charter, we'll be talking of basically the same thing. Sorry. So Accountable Now says international NGOs operating in the domain of accountability with a spirit to increase transparency, effectiveness, and also shareholders' engagement. We have worked closely with a number of standard CSOs organizations that are working, but that are in the area of accountability, setting those standards, to develop a global standard. The global standard is basically a standard that will bring those different entities together in a way to get an aligned standard that we all agree or we are committed to work with. It doesn't necessarily replace the standard that those organizations have, but it sets a common point where we feel like we are aligned. So a number of those standards, 9 of them have been meeting different countries and organizing different consultations to come to that standards. What is different, or what these standards bring compared to what we already know, especially in line with the 7 Istanbul Principles? So the standard want to achieve 4 key points that you will notice very closely aligned to the Istanbul Principles. We are talking of justice and equality. We are talking of women's rights and equity. We are talking of healthy environment, which is basically talking of issue of the global warming and how do we take care of future generation. It's about accountability to future generation, if I can say. And we are talking of lasting positive change. This is where we are talking of impact. A number of issues that are being raised, or they've been raised even during the former session, is about impact. How do we demonstrate the impact, and how do we measure the impact? So those are key issues that the global standard will be looking at. How do we intend to achieve what we want to achieve? So we will be looking at people-driven work. We want to work basically involving people, making sure that people are taken, people voice are taken care of, or we are consulting and getting them participating, and giving us feedback. That's very important. We are looking at strong partnership. How do we partner with others? We are looking of advocating for fundamental change, and we will all be looking at being transparent, or open organizations, sharing what we are doing openly, not hiding anything. And the other aspect of the global standards will be about how do we do internally to achieve that. We are looking at empowered and effective staff and volunteers, making sure that we recruit the right staff and we empower them, we train them, and they know what they do. We are looking at handling resources adequately and managing resources in a way that make that impact we are trying to achieve. In this aspect, I will also highlight the aspect of corruption issues. Anti-corruption agenda will be linked to this one. We are looking at responsive decision making. All our decisions, we need to give opportunity to those we work with to give us feedback. We want to be responsible of those decisions. And finally, we are looking at accountable management and independent oversight. And all this together, Accountable Now is now revising the commitment we have as an organization. Those commitments will be revised, and our members, our member organization, will be reporting against those commitments. The issue is how do we make sure that those reports are really reflecting the image of accountability in CSOs that are member to Accountable Now. The issue of evidence. How do we prove evidence? How do we measure and give adequate evidence of impact that we are making as organizations? Those are key points that I want to highlight at this point.
Thank you very much, Ellie. And I think we're seeing a lot of similarities there, which is a good thing, because we wouldn't want to be all heading in different directions. A lot of emphasis on self-assessment, on transparency, on rights. And we've heard it at a reasonably high level from those who are organizing. But now, Suzanne works at the national level in Bolivia on this. Maybe we get a response from you now about how is this working out in Bolivia with your NGO civil society network?
Okay, thank you, Justin. Yes, it's interesting to talk about this issue because I think we are facing the same challenges everywhere. And in Bolivia, UNITAS is doing some, or having a interesting experience of self-regulation with an ethic, political and social commitment and responsibility. That's the main commitment that we've done as a national network. Since 2002, we have a code of ethics that it's approved approved by our assembly, and in 2010 we also approved a system of information to obtain each year information about all the impacts, the financial information, the outputs, and the governance levels, everything about all the 22 members on our network. So since 4 years ago, we are making at the same time in different cities, in 8 capital cities of Bolivia, public accountability. It's an exercise. It's a very interesting exercise because this is letting us to have more legitimacy, to have or to try to get political sustainability, and also CSO effectiveness to achieve impacts and as development actors. As you all know, in many countries there is not an enabling environment for CSOs, and we think that accountability is a very good experience or exercise to have this possibility to dialogue with other stakeholders in our case and in other countries in Latin America and in other parts of the world, it's not easy to dialogue with the government unless you are aligned with the policies, the government policies. So beyond the exercise of accountability, the challenge is to be a real political and social actor and to have the opportunity to build this culture of transparency and to become human rights defenders. That's the main thing, to understand what we are doing, what's our role as CSOs. And we think that if we have enough capacity to work together and to have a clear political vision of what we need to reinforce or strengthen in our practice, we think that we can promote more structural changes in our own countries.
I think that's a really interesting insight. It's not just about being accountable for the sake of it, but actually the more accountable we are, the more legitimate we are, the more our political action and our engagement can be respected. So that's for me, that's quite an insight in terms of how this begins to open up our agenda. Suzanne, from your perspective, Irish NGOs, European NGOs, how does all of this sound in terms of are people engaging in this, or does it sound like this is the way for you to go, those people you represent?
Thank you, Justin, and it's great to be here. This seems to be the Irish chair. The ambassador was here earlier, and now I'm here, so that's great in the Irish chair. Yeah, I mean, as I say, I don't actually have a framework as such, but just some kind of reflections from what people have said. I think it's first important to say that, you know, there's a lot to kind of celebrate around this issue of accountability. And even just hearing some of the frameworks we've talked about here, we've done a huge amount in what I would say is a very short period of time. I mean, when I started in the world of NGOs, you know, very little of this was here, in fact. But the problem is when you invest a lot in change, I kind of often see it as a pendulum. You go from one side to the other. And the danger sometimes is you go too far the other side. And I do wonder with some of these accountability frameworks, and I think it's already been suggested here, as we want to do more around kind of data gathering, reporting, showing the impact of our work, do we lose the point of it, which is about being transformational and about, you know, ensuring that it's transformational change, not transactional change? And I know certainly in Ireland, a lot of the focus has been on governance, and the tendency is we need to check more boxes and then we'll be shown to be good at what we're doing. But in fact, that doesn't necessarily lead to better culture or better behavior. I think the other challenge that I would say, and I think it's already been suggested, is that question around linkage and coherence between the many frameworks. I suppose in my own experience, I come from the humanitarian side, and I can assure you they have a whole other set of standards and frameworks. In fact, I met somebody last week from the Core Humanitarian Standards Alliance. And I mentioned to her that I was coming here and we were going to talk about the Istanbul principles, and she said, yeah, those principles, oh, you remind me, I must look those up. Okay. So there's a massive challenge here, because if I'm sitting there, whether in Ireland or in the South, as a small NGO, and I want to be accountable, and I want people to trust me, and then I'm suddenly like, well, which one do I follow? And I was reminded even by a big international NGO in Ireland, they said, Suzanne, if we checked all the boxes from all the donor grants, from all the accountability frameworks, from what partners are demanding of us, at a minimum, we'd have to have about 25 checks. Okay? And there's the real challenge for us. How do we make this as simple as possible, whilst also having the measurement or enough standards to make sure we're accountable? The last thing I'll mention, and I dare I mention it, is who's paying for all of this. Again, I was reminded by one of our smallest members in Ireland recently that they've had to really improve their governance structures, even getting an internal auditor in, and she said, Suzanne, overnight it cost me €40,000. And who's paying for that? Because when you look at the grants, you look at the pressures on unrestricted funding, where is that coming from? And it's not just about cost in terms of money, it's about cost in terms of leadership and management time. And I do wonder sometimes if we're fully we realize how much it takes to have all these systems in place. Thanks.
Thanks, Suzanne. So, ANALIA, you got cut short earlier because you were very gracious to allow the thing to go. So I'll come back to you. How do you react to what Suzanne and Susanna have said in terms of how Render Quantas is actually working out?
Well, I would like to say that what Suzanne has just said is very important. That's why Rendir Cuentas, it's also part of the global standard initiative that Ellie explained so well. The global standard, what wants to do is to put together all those different mechanisms and initiatives that are around the world and make one standard. A reference standard that every country or every region can take as a model, and one important thing is that what this standard wants to do, the global standard, is not only to be accountable to donors or to governments, but also to be accountable to the beneficiaries and to the constituencies. Because those are the actors that are less taken into account, and our final work, as Susanna said, is to make them live better, have better lives. So this global standard tries to raise the evidence from the feedback of the beneficiaries or the constituencies, and also give them the tools to make us accountable to them. Because sometimes this is what we forget. We must empower them to make them be able to ask us how we are doing things and what are we doing for them. You know? So the feedback mechanisms that are part of this standard are very important, because it's not only has to be like I don't know how to say that, tangible evidence that perhaps we can have for other of the indicators that we have in the mechanism, but also perception of our beneficiaries or of the people in the country, or that is very important, and we think that is an important shift that we have to make with the mechanisms, and I think that it will make a difference.
Thank you. I'm going to come to Ellie now to have a comment in terms of accountable now, but after that I'm going to go to the floor. And I'm going to take 3 or 4 very short comments, because we only have 16 minutes left for this session. Unfortunately, because of logistics and so on, we're quite short. So if you would like, there's 2 microphones, 1 on each side. So I'll come and we'll have short comments or questions, and then I'll come back to the panel and we'll try and round out by 12 o'clock. So Ellie, we've had some interesting comments from the 2 Susannas. How do they fit in with how you see accountable now?
Yeah, just a reaction to the 2 comments from Suzanne, especially on the transformation change against transaction change, and who pays for all this. When she raised this question, especially who pays for all this, it reminds me the last report, the last article published recently by Paul Roland, the Save the Children Australia, who was talking of the end of the golden age. The end of the golden age is about, basically what he's talking about, the challenges that especially humanitarian development organizations are facing. And he's talking about the impact issue. We need to work towards the impact. If we want to survive, we want to make sure that we demonstrate impact. It has been a challenge over time for civil society to demonstrate that they are making impact. Even when they ask about what impact have you done, they have not been able to show that impact. So basically, this is about the transformational change she's talking about, not ticking. So we spend a lot of time in reporting, and there's a need really to streamline the reporting among donors. Donors are asking a lot of different reports, and you find staff at the field level spending too much time collecting data, writing reports, instead of really doing the real thing. That's a big concern. And therefore, it's important to streamline reporting, to work towards the impact. But this impact will be able to make it or to demonstrate it if we get funding. And then there is also the last comment I want to talk recently in terms of funding. The issue, let me use this BIB again that came out during the World Humanitarian Summit, where there was some commitment to really channel funding from donors to local civil society organizations. The funding for local civil society organizations is really, really small. And they are still, another article recently was about, they are still waiting to see the funding from donors. So having said this, funding need to come. It need to come, but need to be streamlined for also civil society organizations looking at the field level to access those funding.
Thank you, Ellie. So, is there anyone down there dying to say something about all of this? There is a hand down there. Would you like to come to this microphone over here? Maybe you say who you are and, oh, okay, yeah.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Boshe. I'm from Women's Media for Development Foundation, and I am from Zimbabwe. Regards to what the gentleman from Kenya said, as a representative of the civil society organization, I would like to say that we as organizations have got ourselves to blame as well at the same time because of the misuse of funds that is happening within our organizations. That is why you find that donors are requesting more of the reports, more of detailed reports, breakdown of the monies that have been spent because of the lack of transparency that is there within our organizations. Hence, when the money comes in, it becomes so difficult for them to actually release it before seeing the full detailed report, before seeing how the money has been put into use, because as we speak, when the donors release the money, it actually does not go to the respective individuals and the respective activities. Hence, that's why they demand so much of the report writing, so that there is more transparency with the activities that are going on in our organizations. Thank you.
Thank you for that very open and honest comment. Is there, yes. Now, will you speak in Spanish?
A ver si ANALIA me traduce, por favor.
Sí.
No sé qué. Bien, Georgina Muñoz, de la Alianza de Sociedad Civil de Latinoamérica y de una organización con su nombre RENIC. La pregunta.
I'm going to say, she's Georgina Muñoz from Nicaragua, from the
RENIC, y de la Alianza de Sociedad Civil.
Civil Society Alliance and RENIR.
Los resultados de estos estudios, ¿qué nivel de utilidad han tenido para el diálogo ante gobiernos y la sociedad civil?
She's asking what the results of these studies have had when they want to dialogue between governments and civil society.
Short and to the point. Are there, I just go, there's one here, but like, go to the gentleman at the back there first. Could you come to this? And then I come to you. No, sorry, this man first. Come on. Yeah, and then you too. Yeah.
Okay, I'm James Forole Jarso from Sacco Accountability Forum in Kenya. And my concern is having had exposures in various sectors of the development world, from humanitarian to right now I'm working in the human rights and governance sector. I've witnessed some form of divide between organizations working in the humanitarian sector and others working in particularly the human rights and governance sector. Divide in terms of the approach to accountability. And I've particularly seen, proliferation of, what we call minimum standards for all these sectors. Honestly, I do not expect this forum to maybe, I would say, conclusively address this particular issue, but my concern is, what are the prospects for us, driving towards, a convergence, a confluence of agreed minimum standards for all of us, because at the moment, with the humanitarian actors having their own minimum standards, those in human rights having their own standards, there seems to be, a problem somewhere.
Thank you. This gentleman.
Merci de m'accorder la parole. Je suis francophone. Je suis Jean.
Can someone do a translation from the French into English first, please? Yeah. Julia, thank you.
C'est Jean Heshimana. Je viens du Burundi pour l'organisation Terre des Jeunes Transnationale.
So he is, sorry, votre nom c'est Jean?
Heshimana.
I won't be able to pronounce that, and I can't read that because I'm too old. But he comes from Burundi, from a youth organization.
Yeah.
C'est une organisation des jeunes, c'est ça?
Oui. Je suis le point focal pour CPD.
He's the focal point for CPD.
There
is, no, I don't think it's working.
We don't have
They don't have.
We don't have the earphones.
Je voulais parler à propos des principes d'Istanbul, parce que pour moi et pour les organisations de la société civile, c'est notre miroir pour l'efficacité des OC au développement.
So he wants to talk about the Istanbul principles because for him, for them, and for civil society, where he comes from, the Istanbul principles are a mirror for development effectiveness.
Comme nous sommes, vous connaissez bien mon pays, nous sommes dans la fragilité. Il y a toujours des naissances des organisations de la société civile. Ma demande est la demande de soutien pour vulgarisation des principes d'Istanbul au niveau des OC du Burundi.
He says that we are probably familiar with the context in his country, which is still of fragility, and there is a constant emergence of new civil society organizations. So he's making a request, a demand that more support be given to disseminate the Istanbul principles in Burundi. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you. So, Suzanne, you... Okay, I said 4 comments, but we will take one last one as there's a peal from the back. This is definitely the last comment from the floor. I'm sorry, but it's just a question of we have to keep the timetable moving on.
Thanks for your kind permission to speak. I am sitting at the back, that is one problem. I appreciate all the speakers. The first panel and this panel, all are very important and very relevant. I am coming from representing an organization called Asian Muslim Action Network, AMAN. AMAN means peace. I am also representing a Muslim platform for advocacy in this sustainable development. This is very new, still formative stage. Actually, those friends asked me to join to learn. So what discussion is happening, it is a literacy for me. Particularly many Muslim organizations are not yet able to participate and try to understand and communicate back to their fellows. Because in terms of literacy, this kind of literacy, Christian world, Western world is more, secular world is more, but those who are faith-based organizations, particularly Muslim, are still have to learn. So it is opportunity for me. Thank you for invitation. My point is, these all principles I like very much. But how to relate with peace? If you look at now what is happening in Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Somalia, and many other places. Now, in the midst of this kind of destruction, bombing and killing, how do we sustain this spirit? How do you bring this message to the grassroots communities, to the women and children, so that not only us, but this kind of people, millions of them, can also have a chance to live in this sustainable environment. So my appeal is how to enable those places to also share and learn and participate in this kind of process. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I go to Suzanne first, who wanted to address Georgina's comment, I think.
Yeah, no, thanks very much. Just going back to that comment around misuse of funds. I mean, it was a good example in Ireland recently where, you know, in the spirit of honesty, where we had a big domestic NGO that had a big issue around fraud. The interesting thing was they complied with every rule and regulation. They had the financial standards, they did their audits, they did everything that the donors wanted. But the problem was the culture and behavior wasn't being monitored through all those standards. So my question here is, when there is an issue around misuse of funds, there are a couple of things. The automatic response of donors is to get more reporting, and I do wonder if that is the right approach. And I do think we need to do more in terms of how we're really monitoring that culture and behavior. I think we heard earlier this morning around leadership, for example. I don't think there's any indicators around that, how long people stay on staff and things like that. So I think we've got to remember that issue around culture and behavior. The second thing I did just want to pick up on, we talk a lot about this proliferation of frameworks. And I don't have the answer here, but I'm not entirely convinced the answer is to move to just one single standard. I think we've got to accept we're working in so many different contexts, even just the language barriers, that kind of literacy level between grassroots, and is it about one standard? But I do believe those that are kind of, developing these frameworks, it's an obligation and responsibility on them to link with others and to see what those linkages are. But I don't know what other people would think is, should we be moving to one standard, or is it more about just saying, I think you mentioned about a reference of the various standards. Thanks.
Amy, you're a global network. How does all this land with you?
Well, of course, I'm going to answer all the questions now. No, just on the global standards and having it as a reference point, I think that is one of the causes for celebration. I think it's moving in the right direction, as long as it is used as a means of opening up resources for those working on the front lines of change and social transformation, and as long as it allows for us to lower the threshold for smaller, less visible, organized formations of civil society to demonstrate accountability and access resources. So just a quick reply on that. I also see that there's some causes for concern as well as celebration. I think our colleague from Zimbabwe also pointed out that there's kind of a crisis of accountability as well as cause for celebrations. And I think just to give an example of this, Civicus is part of something called the VUCA Coalition, which is a global coalition that VUCA means to awake or to rise up. And basically, the point is to awaken citizen participation around the world. And one of the main work streams is to develop an alternative narrative to the idea that civil society organizations are foreign agents who are spies and there to undermine local agency. So a lot of it is to push back against external kinds of conversations. But it's also, I think, the need for the counter-narrative arises from public's lack of trust in us as actors. And I think that it's we're falling short of expectations if we don't acknowledge that and say that what are we doing? What are the behaviors that we are manifesting that are causing our publics and our constituencies to lose their trust in us? And so I think we also need to make sure that any kind of accountability mechanism, first and foremost, prioritizes our accountability to the people we serve. And I think it's come up in different panels by different people, but to remember the for whom and why are we here. And then finally, if I have a finally, is there time? a very quick finally. The other kind of point to this counter narrative is this idea that our last question kind of raised is, what is the language that we're using and what is the accessibility of these standards and frameworks? If it's 28 boxes that people have to check, we're not getting it right. And if we're using language that no one understands, then we're not getting it right. So I think we have to really go back to the beginning and speak from a values point of view and how is it that we relate together and really tap into kind of our core solidarity with each other and then move on from there.
Susanna, your last thoughts.
Okay, my last thoughts, only 2 points. When we are working as development actors and we don't have to reduce the CSO's scenario only to NGOs, we are so many and diverse CSOs working everywhere that I think it's important to, for being transformative, to keep our political independence and autonomy. That's the important thing, to feel that we are walking towards our goal. And the second thing is that it's really necessary to face the self-censorship. I think when we ask why governments are afraid of CSOs, it's because we really have a power to change things. But what happens if civil society decide to keep silent? And that's what's happening in many countries. I think that situations are different in fragile states or in dictatorships and things like that. But in a general sense, in everywhere, civil society must be more active, proactive, and must have must be able to face what governments, especially governments, donors is another kind of dialogue, but governments must understand the role we have. And that's the really big challenge too. Maybe Ms. Virginia Dandan will agree with me. It's worse to have this situation of self-censorship than to receive the control, the direct control of the state. So that's the challenge that we must all face.
Thank you, Susanna. And I think, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it there. You want one quick? Okay, well, we have a very quick comment from each of you there, and then we'll have to, 1 minute.
Okay, quick one. The comment from our Muslim colleague when he is talking about peace. I think this is a very important issue. When you look at the humanitarian crisis that we are having currently across the globe, many are related to conflict. So it's possibly needed to think about, do we need to come up to a commitment about peace, being peace builders, being connectors instead of dividers? That's very important. Finally, last one, regarding the corruption issues. I am talking about transparency on corrupt practices and bribery happening in organization. As CSOs, we need to be courageous to talk about it, because only when we talk about it and we are courageous to talk about it, we'll be able to address those issues and will be respected by our partners. Thank you.
Nadia, you began.
Hello. Well, I want to say what Georgina asked about what was in what way this was getting the dialogue with the governments better, well, it depends on the country. In Latin America, in rendir cuentas, it depends if it is Uruguay or Bolivia or Ecuador that have very different governments, the kind of influence that you can do. But for example, in my country, in Uruguay, our exercise of accountability was very welcome in some parts of the government, and they consider it's a good exercise because we try and we say it that we're praying with the example. Civil society organizations are sometimes asking governments to be accountable and asking corporations to be accountable, but we must be accountable also to them and to our constituencies and beneficiaries and the people as a whole. So that's an important point.
Sorry. I was wondering where it was. So, thanks very much, panel. I think that it was a very good exposition of the many, many issues that are involved in this business of being accountable as civil society. And what I get is that there's a lot of initiatives. They are value-based, and the values are the same. They're operating in different regions at different levels between the global and the national. There are tensions between human rights, humanitarian, corrupt issues. Should we be looking for one common framework, or can we have unity and diversity? So this has been kind of an introduction, because the good news is that there will be 2 workshops to follow up on these issues this afternoon and again tomorrow morning. Suzanne, together with our Cambodian colleagues from CCC, are organising the workshop on accountability, and I would invite all of you who are interested in this topic to come, where we can explore these issues in more depth, and where we will then be making recommendations about how this can be brought together and encapsulated as we go forward. So these workshops are going to be very important in terms of extracting the learning from this session and from the subsequent discussions. So please be there. I will not really try to attempt to summarize it anymore. It's been a very interesting and wide discussion. I ask you to show your appreciation for the panel. Thank you.